The usual quiet prevailed until noon, when we were suddenly ordered to get ready to leave at 3:30. Because of a delay in distributing rations, however, we didn't set out until nearly 5. We moved in the direction of City Point, then turned to the left toward the Appomattox River. We crossed at Point of Rocks, and sometime before morning crossed the James River at Turkey Bend, where we bivouacked till daylight. Some of us did not cross till considerably after daylight, being too weak to stand such a long and hurried march. So we decided to refresh ourselves with a little coffee. We no sooner had it ready when along came a few of the provost guard, led by a thing on horseback, who ordered his posse to kick over our coffee, and further ordered us to move on. Quick! I didn't tear myself to pieces to comply, so Mr. Flunky yelled, "You act like you don't mean to hurry." The thermometer of his wrath rose several degrees at my deliberately slow movements, and he drew his cheese knife. He made several threats to decapitate me, and then lunged and drove it into my knapsack with such force that I staggered and almost fell. My companion supposed I was injured, and instantly drew a bead on Mr. Provost. Had I not shown immediately that I had sustained no real injury, I am positive that Jack Brine, my comrade, would have scattered the brains of this fellow into the surrounding woods like so much rubbish. Seeing the box he was in, the provost put spurs to his animal and departed in haste. We moved on at our leisure. July 27th. The mists of morning were just rising and imparted a somber tint to the scene as we formed in line of battle and awaited orders. A chill pervaded the atmosphere, in keeping with the solemnity of the moment. A portion of the brigade was deployed as skirmishers, supported by the rest of the division. A move was immediately made on the enemy's position, scattering them in a precipitate flight, leaving their skirmish line and 4 24-pounders to fall into our possession. The skirmishers might have saved themselves, but instead tried to save the guns. They failed to do either. This was an excellent beginning for us. A further advance on our part was unsuccessful. The Rebs made a stand, and as no reinforcements were sent to our aid, we fell back. A strong picket line was then thrust out with Gregg's cavalry in advance, armed with the Spencer repeating rifles. These weapons made it exceedingly lively for the Rebs, because they can discharge 16 bullets at one firing. A friend of ours from Saco was in this cavalry. He came over to visit this night. He pointed out some of the localities nearby made famous earlier in the war. Malvern Hill is about 2.5 miles away. That is where McClellan gave the Southrons an unmerciful whacking and slaughtered them by the hundreds. July 28th. The rebels did some firing in our front, but our gunboats on the James replied, and also opened up on Fort Darling, a little farther up the river. About noon we moved out onto the Newmarket Road, the rebels having fallen back to some powerful works on Chapin's farm. At the same time, Sheridan's cavalry and the 2nd Division of the 2nd Corps moved out on our right flank and attacked the Confederates but found them too strong to be dislodged. As we couldn't accomplish anything by staying, we fell back into a clearing and rested till after dark. About 9 o'clock in the evening, we started on a movement, whither or wherefore we knew not. We hadn't gone far when we discovered a deucedly familiar look to the area. We soon arrived at, and crossed, the James, then followed a southeast course to the Appomattox, crossing it at Broadway. The night was spent marching, and in the morning we hauled up where the City Point Railroad crosses the road to Petersburg, one of the worst places in Virginia. We suffered from heat, thirst, and infinite dust. July 29th. Stayed in this abominable hole all day. The cool of evening came at last, and we moved on. To our dismay, we soon found ourselves right in front and ordered to relieve a division in the 10th Corps, in the vicinity of the Hare House. Here we were ordered to sit with our accoutrements on and not to go to sleep under any circumstances. Most of us succumbed to sweet dreaming despite the edict. July 30th. Our slumbers were terminated as abruptly as though Gabriel himself had tooted his horn in our ears. The most infernal din and uproar that ever greeted mortals crashed around us. Earth and heaven were rent by an explosion that would have done credit to several thunderstorms. Some of us shot into the air and came down again to find the old planet still left, or enough of it to stand on as we took a look around. We scrambled for shelter from a storm of shot and shell that came hurtling around and over us. Such a scampering and tumult only found its parallel in the rebel lines, where Burnside's mine had been exploded, sending a couple of hundred Confederates into the unfathomable hence in a jiffy. Like most of my comrades, I entertained grave doubts as to the existence of such a mine. These doubts were now dispelled. The explosion of this mine, together with the discharge of 100 shotted guns, the yells of the charging party, as they attempted to enter the breach in the enemy's works, the screeching of the rebels, and the general confusion were enough to destroy the nerves of everyone. The general movement was made by parts of the 5th and 9th Corps. They truly entered the mouth of hell when they charged here. Birney's 10th Corps and Baldy. Smith's 18th Corps supported them, and had things been properly managed, there is little doubt of our complete success in carrying the lines at Petersburg. Instead, we suffered the most mortifying defeat and useless slaughter. After the rebels had time to collect their wits, some colored troops were thrown in, but no troops could stand this deadly fray. The time for support was the instant the mine was sprung. A grand rush at that moment would have swept the rebel lines away. As it wasn't made then, Lee had a breathing spell, and he soon let loose such a withering fire on our lines that no troops could stand before it. Cemetery Hill, the objective, was a sheet of flame. Every gun in the defense of Petersburg swept that spot. Men went down like grain before the reaper. The hole made by the explosion was filled with wriggling humanity, and the rebels poured every form of missile onto them. Escape was impossible, except for an individual now and then who managed to crawl out. The rebels soon turned all their fire on our colored troops, for whom they have a special hate. Who can describe the horrors of heat and thirst as the wounded lay in the broiling sun? The Confederates allowed none of the courtesies to these troops, which they might have extended to white men. But on this occasion they didn't allow us to render aid to white or to colored. The suffering of the wounded was indescribable, for the sun has never shone any hotter in Virginia. Nearly all who were wounded died before night. Darkness mercifully lent her aid, and we sent out details to bring in any survivors. The Union loss in this affair is frightful, and when we consider the paltry results, it degenerates into murder. We didn't gain a foot of ground, a prisoner or a gun. We sacrificed hundreds of lives, and all we got for it was confirmation of the rumor that Burnside had a mine. After witnessing this carnage, we were allowed to return to our old camp of reserve. Heaven knows, we have been into enough of this business since May 4th. All is as quiet as if no battle had been fought, and an inexperienced eye would detect no sign of our having been out of camp. A flag of truce was sent out this afternoon to enable us to bury the dead and bring in the wounded, if any still survive. The Rebs wouldn't recognize the flag, however, nor allow any cessation of hostilities. Nothing can be done until the rebels recognize the truce.